Orthopraxy is correct behavior, action, or practice. Orthodoxy is accepted doctrine. Dictionary.com. What you believe is orthodoxy, which involve doctrines. How you behave in light of your doctrines is orthopraxy. The Torah and the prophets establish orthodoxy, and the life and teachings of Messiah establish orthopraxy. For example, this is orthodoxy. The seventh day is the Sabbath. And this is an example of orthopraxy. Messiah said, "It's lawful to do good on the Sabbath." The Torah and the prophets are to be used to establish doctrines and define righteousness. The Torah and the prophets is what they used as children to teach them doctrines and what righteousness looks like from God's perspective. 2 Timothy 3 verses 15 to 17. From childhood you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith which is in Christ Jesus. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God, and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, thoroughly equipped for every good work. The only scriptures they had from their childhood was the Torah and the prophets. The New Testament didn't exist yet. The early church called the life and teachings of Messiah the way. They teach us orthopraxy in light of the Torah and the prophets, not in place of them. Acts 24 verse 14. However, I admit that I worship the God of our ancestors as a follower of the way, which they call a cult. I believe everything that is in accordance with the Torah and that is written in the prophets. For example, God created the seventh day before there was a law, before there was sin, and even before there was a Jew. Genesis 2 verses 1 to 3. So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. On the seventh day God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. This is orthodoxy, which means we should all be unified in this truth. What we do on the Sabbath is orthopraxy and is defined by the life and teachings of Messiah. In keeping the Sabbath holy, the religious Jews put a lot of extra burdens on the people, which was never God's intention for the Sabbath. For example, the Jews had a problem with people being healed on the Sabbath. Messiah corrected them. Luke 13 verses 10 to 17. Now Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And behold, there was a woman who had a spirit of infirmity 18 years, and was bent over and could in no way raise herself up. But when Jesus saw her, he called her to him and said to her, "Woman, you are loosed from your infirmity." And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight, and glorified God. But the ruler of the synagogue answered with indignation, because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, and he said to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which men ought to work, therefore come and be healed on them, and not on the Sabbath day." The Lord then answered him and said, "Hypocrite! Does not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or donkey from the stall, and lead it away to water it? So ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound, think of it, for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath?" And when he said these things, all his adversaries were put to shame, and all the multitude rejoiced for all the glorious things that were done by him. There was even a second time Messiah healed on the Sabbath. Pay attention to their response to Messiah's correction. They remained silent. They remained silent because they knew Messiah was right. Luke 14 verses 1 to 6. Now it happened, as Jesus went into the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath, that they watched him closely. And behold, there was a certain man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus, answering, spoke to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" But they kept silent. And he took him and healed him, and let him go. Then he answered them, saying, "Which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day?" And they could not answer him regarding these things. These corrections by Messiah were called the way by the early church. They didn't do away with the Sabbath, nor did they change the day. The seventh-day Sabbath is still a holy and blessed day. When God declares something to be holy and blessed, it has value to Him, so it's important to have as part of our lives. There was another time when the disciples were hungry, so they started to pick grain to eat. The religious Jews had a problem with that too. How Messiah corrected them is very important because he actually used an Old Testament principle to teach a New Testament concept in keeping the Sabbath holy. This means Messiah wasn't teaching something new. Luke 6 verses 1-5, Now it happened on the second Sabbath after the first that he went through the grain fields. And his disciples plucked the heads of grain and ate them, rubbing them in their hands. And some of the Pharisees said to them, Why are you doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath? But Jesus answering them said, Have you not even read this, what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him, how he went into the house of God, took and ate the showbread, and also gave some to those with him, which is not lawful for any but the priests to eat. And he said to them, The Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath. When it comes to Sabbath observance, we really have to pay attention to what Messiah taught. The reason for this is because the religious Jews put a lot of extra rules on the Sabbath that God never intended. Let me give you an example of where you can find modern-day legalism in light of doctrine. All Jews know the seventh day is the Sabbath, that's orthodoxy. Because it's the Sabbath, they have created certain behaviors that are unlawful to do on the Sabbath, such as walking too many steps or pushing an elevator button. This is legalistic orthopraxy. Another example of legalistic orthopraxy is the Eruv. The Eruv is a small wire that encircles Manhattan along with many other Jewish communities. This wire allows Jews to carry things outside of their homes. It allows them to walk about in the community. It even allows them to push their baby strollers outside of their home. They say it's unlawful to do these things outside of the house on Sabbath. Because of this, they put a wire up around Manhattan as a boundary. Anything within the boundaries of the wire is considered still being in your home. This allows them to lawfully do things outside of their home. This is legalistic orthopraxy in light of orthodoxy. If Messiah was here today, he would correct them. Pay very close attention to what Messiah tells his followers. He says the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you. Moses' seat is a term used to say, they have authority to teach the Torah and the prophets, in other words, doctrines. Messiah then goes on to say, You must be careful to do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. Basically, what Messiah was telling the people was to obey what they taught, but don't do what they do. What they taught was orthodoxy, but what they did was orthopraxy. Their doctrines were correct, but their application was legalistic. Matthew 23 verses 1-4, Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. The teachings of Messiah made it easier to follow Torah. This is because he removed all the man-made burdens and rituals that the religious Jews put on the people. This is why Messiah said what he said in Matthew 11 verses 28-30. Matthew 11 verses 28-30, Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Notice how Messiah says we have to learn from him, and how his yoke is easy and his burden is light. He didn't say there would be no yoke and no burden. We still have to obey Torah when following Messiah, it's just not done in a legalistic way. This is why he said this in Mark 2 verse 27. Mark 2 verse 27, The Sabbath was made to benefit man, and not man to benefit the Sabbath. As one who is under the lordship of Messiah, we are no longer under the strict dictates of the Mount Sinai covenant. This means that we ourselves are Lord of the Sabbath. In other words, we govern our own behaviors on the Sabbath in light of Messiah's teachings. Matthew 12 verse 8, "For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Obeying the Torah, in light of the teachings of Messiah, is not done in order to make ourselves right with God. We follow Torah because we are already right with Him, through the cross of Messiah. Romans 2 verses 12 to 13, "Those who have sinned without having the Torah will perish without the Torah being used. Those who have the Torah and have sinned will be judged by the Torah." Just to hear the Torah does not make a man right with God. The man right with God is the one who obeys the Torah. Notice how the man who is right with God is the one who obeys God's law. That's how you know they are right with God. This is why Messiah said, "You'll know the tree by its fruit." 1 John 2 verse 29, "If you know that he is righteous, you know that everyone who practices righteousness is born of him." Did you notice how practicing righteousness is a direct result of the new birth? Obeying Torah is the fruit of our new nature, and is the result of being born again. 1 John 3 verse 7, "Little children, let no one deceive you. He who practices righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous." Did you notice how those who practice righteousness are righteous, just like Messiah is righteous? We know Messiah obeyed the Torah, so those who are righteous like Messiah will also follow Torah, using Messiah as their example. 1 John 2 verse 6, "He who says he abides in God must walk just as Jesus walked." The Torah and the prophets teach righteousness and godly love, both of which are eternal. The life and teachings of Messiah is Torah manifesting as godly love. All the Torah and the prophet teach godly love. Matthew 22 verses 36 to 40, "Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the Torah?" Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important: love your neighbor as yourself." The entire Torah and all the prophets are based on these two commandments. How can you say you practice righteousness if you don't obey the Torah? And how can you say you follow Messiah if you let someone live in pain or be hungry because it's the Sabbath? You can't. Have a blessed and happy Sabbath.